Vocab, you can start if you want, and then
I'm not ready.
Okay.
I need some time to still get some stuff set up while you're speaking. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I think we're live, by the way.
Start if you want.
Yeah, we're live.
I'm not ready. None of us are ready. Who's ready? Good. Why don't you start?
Awesome.
Hey, I hear like
still get some stuff set up while you're speaking. Is that okay?
Yeah. I hear like 8 mics going. What the heck? Hey guys, turn
Whose
your
mic
audio
is
on.
that? Is that you, McCrae?
Yeah. No, man, I fixed it.
I hear
I
like
still hear it.
What's up,
hey,
everybody?
I'm hearing myself. Hey, I hear like 8 mics going. What is wrong with you guys?
Mine's muted. Is yours
Whose
okay?
audio is that? Oh, that was mine.
Oh!
I was complaining about my own audio the entire time.
Oh!
What's up, everybody?
I had it. I accidentally had it on 2 different browsers, and I was like, "Mine's muted. What's wrong with these guys? What a bunch of morons over there!" And it was on a different. It was open on a different browser as well. So
Sweet justice right there. Boom.
That is, guys. Just so you know, I repent of any negative thoughts I had about you in my head, and all the things I said about you in my head and vocally about this incident that we just had.
Well, David Wood, I appreciate that. Now, if you could feel yourself subdued and humiliated and pay me the jizya.
Yeah, that's what happened.
All right. Well, good times, everybody. Here we are. Islamicize Me number 10 with David Wood over here.
Hey, Eric Hamilton said the Apologetics Avengers are a high-class professional operation, but I detect sarcasm. Comment.
My sarcasm detector also has been aroused.
Justin says that we should have a roast session.
I'm down with that.
Oh, did you say a roast session?
Yeah.
Hey, I thought about that. I thought about that as a
Fundraiser?
like an entire a separate video, but like a roast of Muhammad, right? Where Vocab, you're Muhammad, and it's a roast, but we're like dressed up as like all these different people from history and stuff, like just getting up and roasting the heck out of you, and
So
maybe in the
Stalin?
end, like chop all our heads off or something like that. I don't know.
So like Stalin, Winston Churchill, have like these.
Hitler's in there. Boy, you all thought I was bad. Look at this guy, right?
Throw in someone like random, like 50 Cent or something.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. If they thought we were bad before, if we did something like that, just forget it. Well, okay. Yeah, there was a guy today I was talking to, and he was kind of down and different stuff, and I encouraged him, and I told him if he played his cards right, maybe one day he could, because he's a fellow apologist. You know who he is, actually, John. And I was kind of joking. I said, hey, look, maybe if you play your cards right, maybe one day you could be part of the Apologetic Avengers. But I told him one key requirement is he has to be willing to make a total fool of himself.
That is like the primary requirement. Right?
Yes. So he's
like
contemplating.
You can't even get through the door.
And there's a Bible verse for that. Fools for Christ. Paul, it's in the Bible. That's not proof texting or anything. Okay. But in all seriousness, folks, so here we are.
Hey, you got to look it up right now. Foolsforchrist.com.
See if it's there. So, someone go in the chat.
Fools for Christ Ministries.
Yeah, I'm sure that exists. It's probably like some clown ministry where they go around to birthday parties, or some incarnation of they reenact jesters. I'm sure there's something there. Or it could just be Reuben Israel. Just kidding.
What the heck, man? Why you got to be spending all your time attacking other Christians?
Well, that's the next edition of our series. Haven't you heard? Criticize me.
I have a joke that's too good, but I'm not going to say it.
Yeah, I know, because I know exactly what you're thinking. Okay. So anyways, everyone, we're professionally trained apologists. You have to go to school for this type of thing. Clown school, that is. But in all seriousness, we got Jon McCray of What Do You Mean right down there. We got David Wood. And right before we went live, what did David Wood do? He dropped the last video. The epilogue is now out. It's on Act 17 Apologetics. And guess what? Tomorrow, I'm going to be doing a commentary on the epilogue. So come back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock East Coast time. I'm going to do a live commentary for that final epilogue. So I'll still see you guys tomorrow if you want to be down for that. I don't know which one of you guys can come or whatever, but I'll be here, and I hope to see you guys in the audience there as well. So with that, this is unISLAMICIZE Me number 10, a little bit different than the other ones. We're going to give sort of our story of how we became Christians, so how we became Christianized, and also reasons why we find it compelling or beautiful to be Christianized. We're just using that word. We normally wouldn't use the word Christianized, but in light of the series. And so I think the format's going to be Jon McCray, then David Wood, then myself. I think that's how we're going to do it. We'll interact with some questions or comments, but I'm excited about today. This is a little more of personal, but obviously there's objective reasons, and we're going to get into those as well. We haven't pre-planned this one out other than the general format and stuff, so everyone has a lot of free reign with this one. So I'm really actually excited to hear what everyone has to say. So everyone, welcome to number 10. And I think we're ready. David, you got anything to say? John, you got anything to say before we start?
No, sir.
All right.
Not a word.
Say what?
I said not a word.
Oh, okay. I thought you said awkward.
That was 3 words.
That would have worked too.
But that's at the end though. Is when
awkward.
We do that. Okay. So I'm seeing everybody here. We've got 105 people watching, people from the Philippines, people from Canada. Nice. Excellent. Jon McCray, please talk a little bit about how you became Christianized, your testimony, and some compelling reasons that you'd like to share with people as far as why you find Jesus compelling, why you find it true and believable.
Yeah, so I probably should have wrote some key points, because if not, I'll ramble on forever. But kind of like the gist of my story is I wasn't raised in a Christian home. So not in a church going home or anything like that. So we didn't really talk about religion that much. My parents would say stuff here and there, kind of like more, I want to say like superstitiously in a sense, kind of like, but it wasn't really a thing that we really talked about much, and we didn't go to church or anything like that. And so when I was 15, my aunt introduced me to this church. It was a really charismatic church. And we went, me and my brother and some of our friends and stuff like that. But we stayed there for maybe about 6 months, something like that. And there was just some stuff going on. I remember I was like, people were having these sorts of experiences and stuff like that, but I wasn't having any of these experiences. And I was like, what's wrong with me? That sort of thing too. And so after that, I tended to be more kind of agnostic. And my twin brother, he kind of hung on to it a little bit, and now he's agnostic or atheist, something along those lines. But I was kind of more agnostic, and there'd be a lot of times where I was like, it's like something has to exist. God has to exist, because I would just like see like the stars, and because I'm a big time science nerd, but see the stars and everything like that. And I was like, something has to exist. And then there's other times where I was just like, yeah, no, we're definitely all alone in this big universe, and I would go back and forth between that just like all the time, and then when I went to college, I wanted to take a world religion class, because I was just kind of interested in the different views in religion and stuff like that. And in college, the world religion class, they said was full, but they said I could take a philosophy of religion class. And I didn't even know what philosophy was. So I was like, well, I guess I'll just try it. If I don't like it, I'll drop out, right? And so when I took the class, I was shocked, because I didn't realize that there was thinking that went along with religion, right? So I was like, it was really weird to me to hear these people make arguments. So we went through a textbook. I actually still have it. This one. This is the textbook we went through. So you can see I went through it many more times since then. But I went through it during class. Can see if you guys see it. It's called Reason and Religious Belief, an Introduction to Philosophy of Religion. This is the 3rd edition that I had. And we went through it. And as we went through it, there was an argument that I came across that I just found extremely compelling. And it's called the Kalam cosmological argument. The argument basically says, It's basically if the universe or everything that begins to exist has a cause, which is the first premise. Second premise is the universe began to exist. And so the conclusion is that the universe had a cause. And then so going through that, I got to a point where I went through the argument, and then you get to the end where you're like, okay, what is this cause? What is it going to be? Or what does it have to be like? And the cause, if it created all time, space, and matter, it would have to be timeless, spaceless, and immaterial, right? And then there's arguments for volition, saying that it has to have free will and that sort of thing too. But the basic kind of gist was it made a lot of sense to me. I said, God has to exist. And what was so compelling to me about this argument is it didn't presuppose God in advance, but instead just by logical necessity, if you grant these premises, then the conclusion has to follow, right? And so I've always been into physics a lot and stuff like that too. And so I really like the physics, but just kind of getting to the point where you're like, yeah, the universe began to exist. Whatever, it couldn't have just popped into existence out of nothing, because nothing is a universal negation. It can't do anything, or it can't turn into anything. And there's all sorts of complex arguments that go around it. But anyways, I remember getting to a point where I was just sitting there and I was like, this makes sense. I believe in God now. And I just remember saying that to myself. I was like, I believe in God now, and it was kind of like a set belief there at that point. It was just like really convincing. And so anyways, after that, I started looking at like the teleological argument as well too. It's like the fine tuning argument. And that in conjunction with it was really compelling to me. And then so started kind of going through all these other arguments. And I said, the probability of God existing is a lot higher than God not existing. It makes a lot more sense, and it makes sense of life and consciousness and all these other type of things in life. So from there, I didn't know which kind of God exists or anything like that. I didn't even think in terms of religion. I was just like, I don't know, you know what I mean, if God's revealed himself or not, or nothing like that. So I was more curious about it, and I was very open to it. That's one of the things too, not growing up in a church going home, I didn't really have any like impulses against religion, like any type of thing that would just make me not want to accept religion, right? Or anything like that, or Christianity or nothing like that. But I went to a lot of different churches, and what I found was that everybody told me the same sort of story. And so everybody would say, this church is true because they had this sort of experience, or they prayed and this happened, or, something along those lines. They had some sort of personal experience, or something changed their life, or they used to be bad, but now they're a decent person, and this sort of stuff. But that was kind of disturbing to me. And I remember just kind of feeling down about it, because I was like, yeah, everybody's saying the exact same thing, but all these different religions can't be true, right? Because I was just getting into really studying the different religions a lot too, and realizing how all their beliefs are contradictory. So they all can't be true. So anyways, long story short, I started researching churches before I started going to them. I even went to like Scientology churches, Mormon churches, Jehovah's Witness churches, went to a lot of different churches. And when studying them and stuff like this, I came across evidence for the resurrection. And so I started getting into that and looking at the evidence for the resurrection. And I said, this is a one-up on every other religious belief. I mean, I said, and here's the thing too. So I went to go take the philosophy of religion class again the following year. And this is where it really settled in for me the most, is because I was actually assigned the job of, so at the end of it, we had a final, which was a debate. And we had to draw our position from a hat. And I got assigned the position of debating for the resurrection, to go against it, to show that it didn't exist. And when I went through these facts and really took a really close eye at them, I was like, I can't argue for this position without cheating in some way, or question begging in some way, because I was like, how do you explain these facts? And I took the minimal fact approach, where I was going to attack the minimal facts. And I said, if I can disprove some of these facts, you know what I mean, then I could get to a point where I can escape the conclusion of the resurrection. But anyways, I went through it all too. And I just remember I was like, this is super compelling, because I couldn't think of my way out of it, right? And so anyways, it was at that point in classes where it kind of solidified for me, because that's when I was forced to sit down and really go through it in detail. So anyways, yeah, long story short, like years later, I still find the evidence for the resurrection extremely compelling. And I still find the Kalam cosmological argument extremely compelling too. And I've kept up with all the science that's relating to it as best as I can, that sort of thing. And I argued it for a lot of years online and stuff like this, just to kind of test it, and hear all the different objections and stuff like that. And I just still find the position really, really compelling. So that was pretty much the start of of my Christian journey. And then I'd say years later is when it kind of made its way from here down to here. And that's a different story too. But at a certain point, it kind of just hit me in my heart too, where it became not as much just intellectual, but it actually really came into my heart. And it's when I started internalizing the Gospels more deeply and internalizing the gospel message deeply and stuff like that. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
All right, just so you guys know, I'm here, and thank you, Jon, for sharing. Do you see any comments in the chat where maybe somebody is interacting with anything you said you would want to respond to? I'm looking myself.
Yeah, Vocab. I think there was a super chatter. You might want to acknowledge that while Jon scrolls through, because there are a bunch of comments dealing with Jon. So if he wants to take a couple of those, then,
Jesus is God, grace to faith. In the super chat, Brother David, have you established for October a debate between your brother Sam and Kareem Al-Hanifi?
I'm not establishing anything, but there are people who are trying to set up debate in Florida, and so yeah, I'll do whatever is required of me there.
Okay, gotcha. So that's all we know for now on that. But thank you for the super chat, and hopefully your wishes come true. Jesus is God, grace to faith. What about you there, Jon? Do you see?
Just reading comments. So that says Lawrence Krauss saying nothing is from something. That's from Don't Worry. I'm assuming, I don't know if Don't Worry is affirming Lawrence Krauss or not, but kind of just to touch on that objection. Lawrence Krauss wrote a book where he argues that this is how we get something from nothing. But what Lawrence Krauss is really talking about, everything that he's talking about when he describes nothing, he's talking about something. So when I say nothing, I mean it in as a universal negation. It means the absence of everything. And that's very hard for us to conceptualize because all we see is things and stuff like this, right? But when we talk about the absence of everything, that's what we're talking about when we say nothing. We're talking about everything physical and that sort of thing. So if time, space, and matter had an absolute beginning, then anything that could do something to bring in time, space, or matter is going to have to be immaterial, non-physical, and that sort of thing too. But God would actually be existing from eternity, as the Bible says. And this is what's so crazy to me about Christianity is that, I always say this, I believe in Christianity because I believe that it corresponds with reality. And so in the Bible, you have in the beginning God, God existed eternally, because whatever could create the universe and all this, it has to be something that exists for eternity, because it existed apart from physical time. So it's something that would have to exist for all of eternity. And it would have to be something with free will in order to start something to exist. So I'm trying not to get into the deep kind of science stuff, so we're not kind of getting thrown off of the deep philosophical stuff. But just to respond to what Lawrence Krauss says, he's talking about something. He's talking about quantum fields, which are absolutely something. They're not nothing. And so all it does really is just push the question back. He's not really answering why there's something rather than nothing. Not in the way that that we mean in philosophy. And for more on this, check out the Leibniz cosmological argument too. And then that's where he deals with the question of why is there something rather than nothing. And then you can understand it philosophically, and then you understand why Lawrence Krauss's objection doesn't really make sense. It doesn't really get to the heart of the issue. Let me check something else. Just make sure. I
don't know if I see any other.
Says all their gods are dumb. Yeah, this is by Darso M. So I think he's just saying, I don't know if he's saying that all views on God are dumb. I would say all comments like that are dumb. But no, I think the way I look at it is we want to know what's true. So if something's true, it's going to correspond with reality. So it's not enough to just say belief in God is dumb or something like that. You have to show why it's dumb. And yeah, if you want to point your objection in to show why it's dumb, Darso, if that's what you're saying, then I'll be happy to respond to that.
Good. Well, all right, we'll move on to David. And because today we got to make sure we end straight up on time, because Jon does have to go. And so we're going to work on that. David, are you doing those Illuminati hand signals again?
Yeah, I realized I was just thinking the same thing, that anytime I sit here, whether I'm just cracking my knuckles or twiddling my fingers or something like this, I get a message like 4 days later that'll have it like screenshotted, like right on something, right? And then the message will be, "I saw what you did there, David. I saw you with that Illuminati hand signal," and pretty funny.
Totally. What is an Illuminati hand signal? Does anybody know?
I think the theory is that they're like this secret group, but in order they send out signals, right? So that other people who know the signals can spot them, right? So if I were Illuminati, I'd be sitting here and, so as we come to this conclusion here,
but
right?
Is that one right there? What is?
How would I know? How would I know? And if it is, do you think I'm going to tell you, or I'm just gonna keep it secret that I just sent a message to all my Illuminati brothers and sisters out there?
I get the theory that they say that's the way you let the Illuminati masters and whatever know that you're working for them or something. But although doesn't it seem like there'd be a better system, this highly secretive, functional secret society controlling society, and all they can do is send hand signals to each other over video?
I mean, it works for street gangs. Why wouldn't it work for the most secret society in history?
Right. Yeah.
The dumbest society in history. It's a secret that everybody knows about.
It
was. Yeah. It's like if Illuminati was something, then it would be the worst kept secret in the entire world.
I just wonder what one is. Like this one is one, right?
Oh, someone's gonna screenshot this.
I know. No, I know.
Oh yeah. Hey guys, when I did my video, the jihad triangle, and I'm explaining things in terms of a triangle, and I'm sitting here going like this on the screen. Oh, that was the main one where I started getting. We saw what you did there. We saw.
We should just all do it at once, just to like just take screenshots. Just like.
Oh yeah. Here we go. Hey, take a screenshot now.
Hand signal.
You guys know, no, I'm not doing it because you guys know how people are on the internet. People they don't want to go to the source. So they're going to be like, see, I knew it. And everybody's just going to eat it up. And then
if someone is so bad in their argumentation that they would see a screenshot of that and actually think that's what we're doing, then I probably have no chance of ever convincing them of anything rational anyway. So just whatever. All right. So David, when you were, tell your... I was going to try to ask you something about the Illuminati with your testimony, but never mind. What's the reason that you became a Christian and why you find it compelling, and things you would want to share about that? Because not everyone has heard, and you can always add new things that you haven't talked about before. So what would you say, David?
Well, as far as why I became a Christian, people, of course, can watch I'm sure many of the people here have watch my testimony. If you haven't, it's called David Wood, Why I'm a Christian. So you can type in Why I'm a Christian into YouTube and it'll pop up. But as far as the reasons go, there were basically three things that started bothering me, because I'd built my entire life around the idea that this life is all there is, and so you might as well do what you feel like doing with the little bit of time that you've got. And if you happen to be a psychopath, that's not going to turn out well for other people, but who really cares? It's not like it matters in the long run. And eventually that reasoning started breaking down a bit, and there were three issues that started bothering me. And it wasn't I wasn't given arguments. I thought I was coming up with these. I thought I was figuring these things out, and I didn't find out till later that these are traditional arguments. But it was a kind of design argument and a kind of moral argument, and then the resurrection of Jesus that started bothering me a lot. So the design argument, and for those of you who've seen my testimony, you know that this was taking place in a jail cell. But I was looking at the blocks that made up my cell one day, and I was looking at them and I was thinking, someone told me that these blocks went into this arrangement on their own somehow by some natural process, any natural process. I think it's the most idiotic thing that anyone has ever come up with. And yet it's just a bunch of blocks stacked on top of each other. It's a very, very simple arrangement. And I would never believe that they could have gone into that simple arrangement by any sort of natural process. And yet I was completely convinced that life formed on its own when these, not just the simplest life, but the simplest imaginable life would be massively more complex and sophisticated than a bunch of blocks stacked on top of each other, right? So you have the simplest known life, which is a bacterium that lives in your urinary tract, is the simplest known life. You can imagine a somewhat simpler life by saying, okay, if we remove this part, would it still be life? If we took that part out, would it still function as life? Once you get to the simplest, even imaginable life, it's still mind-bogglingly sophisticated compared to something like, bricks stacked on top of each other, something like that. And so the question there was, why did I just mindlessly accept something that my biology teacher said in high school? And my biology teacher said there's no problem with life forming and that it could happen, and I accepted it, and never crossed my mind to really sit back and investigate it. Because remember, there's this atheist mantra that they say over and over again. If you talk about the existence of God or something like this, they'll say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, right? Well, guess what? Life forming on its own is an extraordinary claim. That is an extraordinary claim. And so when someone tells you life formed on its own by some natural process, the response should be, wait, you guys are the ones who state this rule. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So give me your extraordinary evidence that life formed on its own. And guess what? They have zero. They have zero. So according to their own mantra, no one should ever believe that life formed on its own, or that the universe formed on its own, or that the universe was finely tuned by coincidence. You shouldn't believe any of these claims because you should demand, according to them, extraordinary evidence, and they haven't provided any. So basically the apparent design of life started making me question my naturalist conviction. And not just that, it made me start thinking, wait a minute, how did this belief get into my head without being tested? My belief that life formed on its own. How did that get into my head without me objecting to it? Because that's scary. So just give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. Let's suppose that you're a Secret Service. You work for the Secret Service or something like that, right? And you've been hired to, your job is to protect the president. And suppose the president's about to speak and you're in charge of making sure people don't have weapons when they go through the door. So you put them through a metal detector and you pat them down. And so you're making sure people going through there don't have weapons on them. If you're sitting in there and everyone's supposed to be safe, and all of a sudden some guy in the crowd pulls out an AK-47, you start thinking, wait a minute, I thought I had checked everyone. And here's this guy with this AK-47. Now notice what that means. One, it means that whatever method you were using to check people on their way in didn't work. It didn't work because there was a guy with an AK-47 and you were supposed to be checking people for weapons. But it also means that for all you know, anyone in there could have an AK-47. If your method was defective for checking people for weapons and a guy got past your system, then anyone else in there could have a weapon too. You don't know. In which case you need to get everyone out of there because you don't know who's got a weapon. You have a defective method. So anyway, the point of that was, if you think about how we arrive at ideas, there's supposed to be, we should have a system in place that helps avoid false beliefs. We don't allow false beliefs into our head. And so when an idea is presented to us or a belief is presented to us, you would hope that there's some sort of system in place check it, to give it a pat down, to put it through a metal detector and see, hey, this is not a bad or a dangerous belief here, is it? And if all of a sudden you realize, hey, here is a really, really strange belief that's in my head, and I never thought to even question it. And now that I'm actually thinking about it, it sounds utterly ridiculous. Then you start, it's like you start questioning everything else. Like what other silly, ridiculous ideas did I absorb without even bothering to question or think about them seriously, just because a teacher or someone else said them when I was a kid or something like that. So that started me thinking. So that was one of the things. The next was a kind of moral argument where I was studying Christianity at the time. I was studying the Bible at the time, the Gospels. But I was doing it because I wanted to refute this Christian that I'd been arguing with. And as I was studying the life of Jesus, Jesus seemed pretty cool a lot of the time. And up until then, I thought that I was like the greatest, most advanced human being who'd ever walked the planet. And yet Jesus kept seeming really, really cool by comparison. And I would always think, oh, look, that was cool what he said right there. And I was like, wait a minute, no, what the heck? That's not what I would have said. And so I was having a little puzzling thoughts along the way, namely that there's something incredibly appealing about this Jesus guy, and yet he's completely different in his way of thinking from me. Why was I finding anything about his life or teachings good in some way? It was totally different. So anyway, but as far as the moral argument goes, again, I wasn't reading this anywhere. This is just how my thinking went. I had two beliefs. I held two beliefs simultaneously, and I'd held them for years and didn't spot the contradiction between them. One, I believed that I was somehow the next stage of humanity, and that I was the best, most important person in the entire world. But two, I believe that life is completely meaningless. It's all, the universe is eventually going to wear down. Nothing that we ever did is really going to matter. We're a bunch of blobs of cells, completely insignificant cells, and a little speck of dust that makes absolutely no difference in the grand scheme of things or in the universe. And so notice the contradiction. I'm the best, most important, meaningless lump of cells, right? Those don't go together. You once you spot the contradiction, you have to drop one of them, right? If I decide to drop the claim that everything is meaningless, then I've got a problem, because what is it that makes everything meaningful? What is it that gives life meaning? How is it not meaningless? Or two, if I decide to keep the claim that everything is ultimately meaningless, there's not really a point to anything, then obviously I'm not the best, most important anything, right? It's all pointless. So I started seeing a problem there, and I realized that if there is any sort of standard of meaning or right and wrong or anything else like that, I'm probably out of line with it, right? I have no reason to believe that I was somehow the standard, and if the standard was something outside of me, then why would I think that I was somehow just automatically in line with it? Anyway, it didn't make sense. Started thinking through there, and so my entire moral framework started to break down. And after that it was the resurrection, and so that's actually why I became a Christian. Because notice, you could acknowledge those first 2 points and just be a kind of generic theist or something else. You could acknowledge that life has a creator and that there is some sort of standard of meaning and morality. You could acknowledge those things and not become a Christian. But Jesus rose from the dead. And when I say that, I mean that we actually know historically that Jesus rose from the dead. His crucifixion was a public event. We know how Roman crucifixion worked. You don't survive crucifixion. We only have one instance of a person surviving a partial crucifixion. He didn't go through the entire process, but he survived a partial crucifixion because Josephus requested of the Roman leader take his 3 friends who had just been crucified down from the cross. So they were taken down, and they were given the best medical treatment the Romans had. 2 of them still died anyway, even though they'd just been put up on the cross. And so 1 survived. That's the only known person to survive a partial crucifixion. No one ever survived a full Roman crucifixion. Didn't happen. And so Jesus was crucified. It was a public event. And so we know that he was dead, but we also know that a very short time later, a few days later, his followers were convinced that he had appeared to them after rising from the dead. And, you know, you can have lots of people who make strange claims or who think that someone appeared to them. But what started bothering me about this was I found out how these guys died. And this was a problem for me because I thought that I had an explanation for Christianity. I thought I had Christianity explained. And this is another situation where, you know, my grandma or something like this would tell me something about Christianity when I was growing up, and I would explain it away. So how do I explain the apostles going around preaching that Jesus appeared to them risen from the dead? Well, it's very easy. You can explain it by a kind of conspiracy. The apostles believed in Jesus, but then he died, but they wanted to keep his message going. They wanted to keep the movement going. And if you make up a story about someone rising from the dead, you can convince a lot of people to join that movement. And history shows that they were right. Lots of people believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Why? Because the apostles wanted to keep the movement going. So this is what they started preaching, making up a story about Jesus rising from the dead. So I thought I had Christianity figured out. Then I found out how the apostles died. And the vast majority of them went to horrible, bloody deaths for preaching that Jesus is the divine Son of God who died on the cross for sins and rose from the dead and appeared to them. So the problem was I started trying to think of anyone in history, anyone in all of history who died for something that he knew he was a lie. He knew he was making it up, made up a story, and then when the sword was at his throat, stuck to his guns and said, yeah, well, I'm making this up, but I'm still sticking to my story and go ahead and kill me over it. Couldn't think of anyone like that in all of history. So what are the odds that of all the people in history who are willing to die for something they totally make up? They just all happen to be followers of Jesus, followers of this one guy. So it seemed my hypothesis seemed completely unbelievable. So I had to conclude that these guys are ready to go out and be tortured and killed for their claim that Jesus had appeared to them. They must really believe it. Now, just because they believe it, that doesn't make it true, right? When terrorists crash planes into buildings, that tells me what they believe, but it doesn't tell me that what they believe is true. And so how would that show that Jesus had actually appeared to them? Well, notice the difference. When a terrorist flies his plane into a building, he's doing it for some message that he heard from somewhere else. Someone preached Islam to him, and he believed it with such great conviction that he's willing to die for it. So that's why that doesn't tell me that what he believes is true. He's doing it based on his belief that he got from somewhere else. Likewise, a Christian today might be willing to be martyred to carry the gospel to some lost tribe or something like that. But ultimately, a Christian who's willing to lay down his life believed in the Christian message because it was preached to them, and then the Christian believes it with such conviction that he's willing to die for it. This by itself doesn't prove that Christianity is true. Other things prove that Christianity is true, but not simply a person's conviction that it's true or willingness to die for it. But notice the difference between a Christian today dying for what he believes, or a Muslim today dying for what he believes, and Jesus' original followers dying for what they believe. They weren't dying for some message that had been preached to them and the message could have been true or false. They were dying for something that they saw. So they're in a different category. In other words, when I say, hey, this Muslim is willing to die for what he believes. He crashed a plane into a building, so he's willing to die for what he believes. Can I explain his belief without that belief actually being true? And yes, you can. You can say, hey, he got some bad information and he believed that bad information and those bad arguments, and that's why he believed it. But when you're talking about the apostles, you say, why why did they believe? Well, they saw something that convinced them that Jesus was appearing to them alive after his crucifixion. So the question arises again, how do I explain what they saw? I can explain what a Muslim today believes. I can explain what a Christian today believes. And the explanation doesn't depend on the belief being true or false, because people can believe based on bad arguments. They can believe various things based on bad arguments. The disciples weren't basing their belief on some bad argument. They were basing their belief on something that they were seeing with their eyes. And so the question became, how do I explain what convinced them that Jesus had appeared to them? And I couldn't think of anything that they could see that would convince them as a group that a man had appeared to them on multiple occasions after dying by crucifixion, and he was alive. Couldn't think of anything that would convince them of that. Now, other people in history have tried to come up with an explanation. So there are mass hallucinations or something like that. It shows a bad understanding of how hallucinations work. But there was nothing I could think of that would be remotely plausible. So I was left with, this guy appeared to them after being crucified. So he was dead, and then he was alive again later, appearing to his followers. And that suddenly looks like we've got a miracle on our hands. If we've got a miracle on our hands, then if I'm going to listen to anyone in history tell me about God, then I'm going to listen to that guy. And so once you start saying, what did Jesus say about why he's here? And you decide, hey, I'm going to believe that because he's the one who rose from the dead, then you don't have much of a choice but to become a Christian. So that's how I was Christianized.
Yeah, and thing too is like, you have to realize too, like a lot of people, there's a lot of different objections and stuff, but kind of going through all those different objections, and then that's how you're going to kind of get past some of these objections, because some people might not realize too how insanely bizarre it would sound to a first century Jew to say that like Jesus is God and he resurrected from the dead. This was not in their expectations at all. So it would be very difficult for people to convince people in the same region where the event happened that a man could be raised from the dead. You know what I mean? It's just so contrary to the Jewish view. And that's when you understand the cultural context, it really helps illuminate just how good the evidence for the resurrection is.
Yeah, you even see that a little bit in John 11. Remember when Jesus is going and Lazarus had died, and Jesus asks, the women who came out to sort of berate Jesus for not getting there sooner, if they believed he was the resurrection and life and that Lazarus will rise again and all that. And they said, yeah, when everyone rises again at the end. But the idea of someone sort of out of time or out of step or out of sync in that historical place before a general resurrection was not in their preconception at all. Not only that, that the Messiah, instead of kicking out the oppressors and setting up a Jewish kingdom, would be killed by the oppressors, was way different than what they expected. And you even see that at the end of the book of Luke, where they're sad. Jesus appears to them. They don't know it's him. Why are you sad? One of the things they say is, we had thought he was the Messiah, but he was crucified. And I think it's Gary Habermas who would say, what would you do back then if you're Messiah? Because there were other claimants to being the Messiah during these times. What would you do if your Messiah went and got himself killed by the Romans? You would go and find yourself a new Messiah. But the fact that this movement, despite those expectations and understanding of first century Judaism, the way they thought, got off the ground. And then you had fiercely monotheistic Jews embracing an understanding of God that was more sophisticated or nuanced or complex, you might say, than their prior understanding, the Trinitarian understanding of God. And some of them even saying you could become part of the fellowship without being circumcised, without having to change your eating habits as far as pork, and begin worshiping simultaneously on the first day of the week instead of the last day of the week. These are all radical things for Jews to change in their behavior, first century Jews. And the only explanation, along with other factors, is the fact that the resurrection changed literally everything. So yeah, good points. Someone had something.
Oh,
Well,
no. Oh,
you know, it's funny. I saw a lot of people mention Ecclesiastes in the chat, and that's where I was gonna go when it was my turn. And the reason is because unlike you guys, I was raised in a godly household, like in a sense of my parents were what I would call authentic Christians. You know, they weren't no one's perfect, but they weren't hypocrites. They were sincere, authentic, and I just saw the realness of their walk and faith every day, basically. And so that creates an impression on you when you're young. And then they would speak the gospel to me. And I remember embracing and accepting its truth as soon as I understood I was a sinner in need of a savior in my own elementary way. I said, well, wait, what do I need to do then? I realized there was a problem, basically, because again, my parents not only did good themselves in explaining these things and modeling them, but also putting me around a lot of people who did. So a lot of my parents' friends when I was younger were sort of ex-hippie Christians. Not all of them, but a lot of them got saved during what's called the Jesus movement. And so they were now, you know, getting jobs or going to school or something. But a lot of them were like ex-hippies who came to Christ during this late 70s type period. And so I was around a lot of like pretty radical, like on fire for Jesus people. You know, they busted out singing on their guitars with their long straight hair every chance they could. And they loved any problem. They took it to the Lord in prayer immediately. And so it wasn't only my parents, because my parents were more reserved, but it's funny. They like to hang out with a lot of just kind of radical on fire type people, you know, and just being around that constantly, it's so imminently present and real. It's not like some only just forced to go to church and some structure you fit into. It was a lot more organic and natural, just the way, by and large, I was able to grow up. And I grew up in a pretty Pentecostal environment, therefore, as you could imagine. And, you know, a very Wesleyan or Arminian, not anymore, but, you know, it's all good. I wore that shirt for this reason. But nonetheless.
Shirt I'm wearing.
Oh, One Punch Man. John, unzip your. I'm just kidding. So,
mine's just black. What's that tell you?
Black is beautiful. It's all good. So, being around that, you know, it made an impression on me then, and something that really never left. You know, so, I went off and on as a person, you know, raised in those environments often is. You hear someone that no one is born a Christian. We understand that. But being born into a faithfully Christian household and environment, you know, off and on, up and down my own self. And then I remember by the time I was in high school, you know, I started really drifting away, but really almost like unconsciously. And it happened a lot in the area of like my morals. And so different temptations were there in high school. And it's funny, it's probably not all the things people commonly think. One of them like was actually had to do with graffiti art. And I became like this tagger writer, and it caused me to do all kinds of stupid things and hang out with fun but very stupid people and get in trouble with the law, et cetera, because it became
what was your graffiti name?
Mal1, Malone.
So that's what you'd write?
Yeah, Mal1, and sometimes I put Mal1er. So Mal, and then a common thing, you know, you put one at the end, like KRS1. So Mal1. That's how I became Vocab Malone.
Hey. Let's test your hip hop knowledge. What was Ad Rock's
Was
tag?
I don't care about the Beastie Boys. That's not hip hop knowledge. That's stuff white people know.
Hey, dude.
I have no idea.
Hey, dude, you are lucky that you are the moderator here, because I would totally mute you for the rest of the show after that.
David, oh, let's test your hip hop knowledge. Ad Rock.
I didn't even know who Ad Rock was.
He's a Beastie Boy or something. I don't know. I mean,
Oh my goodness, I'm here with two total losers. Anyway, Ad Rock, when he was growing up, was a graffiti kid, so he sometimes refers to
I'm sure he was. Well, notice you brought up Ad Rock. I brought up KRS-One is my example. So I know you know who KRS is. You know, BDP, Boogie Down Productions. My philosophy.
Yeah. He's one of those guys who will never be nearly as famous as the Beastie Boys. But go ahead.
Stuff white people say. So KRS, tagged at the end. One.
We need to make that a meme.
Totally.
Yeah, quote Wood and say stuff white people say.
Yeah. Ad Rock was more popular than KRS. Anyways, so I was Mal one, and but other things like that, some of the things you could probably guess or imagine. But and I remember after one particular time in the summer where I had really sunk lower than I ever thought I would, as far as what I was willing to do and all kinds of stuff. I remember it woke me up because I just was shocked at what I could be or where I could be going. And I kind of realized, wait a minute, I'm pretty much around my senior year in high school. I know Christianity is true. I thought I did, but then why am I starting to live a certain way? If it's true, I can't live this way. But this could be an attractive way to live if Christianity is not true. So during that summer and that next year, last year of high school, I dove into whatever apologetic type books I could get my hands on. Now they're pretty rudimentary compared to the stuff, we would see now, but it was really kind of just different things I would have access to at the time. But it really encouraged me to think in certain ways. And sort of at the end of that journey, to an extent, there was a certainty that, because it was almost like I had to do one last thing to really see, is this really true first? And at the end of that, I had new knowledge. A lot of questions had been answered, but I also, it was just like, it was like the nail in the coffin. Like, this is true. It's satisfying in every way. I don't have, if it's true, what else am I going to do? And so that's where I began to actually, and by this time, I think I was in junior college. And I determined to finish junior college, get an AA in marketing. But originally I was going to go to Ohio State University and get a BA from there in business, like everybody else type of thing. But halfway through junior college, by the time I really came to this realization, I realized I need to know the Bible better. So that's how I ended up moving to Arizona to go to Bible school. And years later, here I am. That's really how it began, because my priorities began to change. And people are like, wait, you don't know anyone in Phoenix? Because I knew not a soul. And I was 21 at the time, knew not a soul. But it was about this Bible college I felt called to go to. And there is something about, I believe, a sense of God leading and guiding you and directing you. Now, people get silly with it, and I understand that. But I do believe through his word, through experiences, through people, and the application of biblical wisdom, there's a call, and I believe it can be confirmed. So I think that's what happened in my life as far as me moving to Phoenix. It wasn't for any other thing. People are like, wait, what are you going to do for a job? What are you going to do for this? None of that was planned out. I mean, I prepared a year, but none of that was planned out. But God was faithful through that time, through thick and through thin. Now, sometime during what I was telling you, between when I had that situation where I realized I was slipping down a dark path and to where I began to even change what I was going to do with my future as far as schooling, I don't know exactly where, but this was probably the most meaningful experience in all that, was when I was reading Ecclesiastes. And I wish I knew sort of exactly when or where I was at the time. All I knew is that it hit me like a ton of bricks in a way like nothing I had ever read, even in the Bible. Like, I didn't really know Ecclesiastes existed in the Bible in the way it did at the time. And when I came upon it, it just smashed me down and sort of built me back up. David, you're smiling. What's going on? Is there something in the chat?
No, I'm just getting a bunch of messages with pictures claiming that I'm Illuminati. So I started laughing.
Oh, you really are?
Yeah.
Are they serious or joking?
No, they're joking. They're joking.
Okay.
But yeah, it's my Twitter started filling up with claims that I'm Illuminati with screenshots. So yeah.
Illuminati. What do they say? They say Illuminati confirmed. That's how they say it, right?
This one says, "Run to Christ" says, "I saw what you did there, David," and then he's got a pointing at the hand signal. And Bartnick says, it is confirmed David is an evil Illuminati. In this image, you can see him summon the great demon of Krzyuk. So, yeah.
Just so everyone knows, the reason we're joking about this, now we've never talked about this, the three of us. The reason I think we're joking about it is because I don't think we take the claims of the Illuminati and the conspiracy theories that go along with them very seriously. Now, I know some of you in the chat do, and I saw some of you being concerned, but I think by and large, we don't take it very serious. And John hinted towards that when he said, if it's a secret conspiracy, it's the worst one ever because apparently everybody on YouTube knows about it.
Yeah, I mean, that would actually be funny about someone who forms a secret society, but it's all based on like outward hand signals, and so everyone catches on to their secret, their moronic secret society. That'd be awesome. hey, we need to do a Illuminati-ize me or something.
Oh man, that would be popular. But it'd be also annoying. But all right, so we're gonna probably lose subscribers. We're probably gonna lose some people off actually.
Oh yeah.
Conversation.
What? These guys don't believe in this Illuminati stuff? Unsub.
Confirmation they're part of it. Or how could I follow a Christian with such a lack of discernment they wouldn't believe in the same things I do about the Illuminati controlling everything? Anyways,
I know, but I mean, think about this, right, guys? If we are Illuminati, then we have to try and make it more secret, right? So how are we going to do that? By denying it and making fun of it, right? So, come on, guys, think.
By that logic, we're also Muslims.
Yeah, that's the thing about conspiracy theories is if there's no way to falsify, you can read everything into it with some of those systems. It's like,
in conspiracy theory, everything counts as evidence.
Yeah.
Everything. Any evidence contrary to the theory is evidence of a cover-up.
Yeah, and this isn't to bash the people that do believe in the Illuminati. We just, or for me, I think
because in defense of other people, I've never studied this stuff for even 2 seconds in my entire life. So, in theory, I could be completely wrong. There are actual conspiracies in the world and stuff. I tend almost never to believe in a conspiracy theory if there's another explanation.
Right.
Like the alternative explanation here would be it's just a bunch of nonsense, right? So that would be the alternative explanation, but I've never actually studied it. So it could, in theory, be a case of an actual, right? Again, real conspiracies do exist. So certainly possible.
What about the conspiracy theorists who think that Jesus never existed? Those are funny too.
Yeah, that's some of the most moronic stuff ever.
Yeah, well, I mean, with it, well, yeah. This is a funny conversation. Yeah, definitely we're gonna get in trouble on this, but whatever, peoples. All right, check this out. Ecclesiastes. I want to read some of these verses that when I was going through doing it, I remember being in my room, which was in the basement of the house, reading through these, and every time everything made so much sense, and it just stripped away a lot of pretensions I had and kind of random, vain, silly thoughts I had about life and just brought me way down. But then fortunately, since I had a general understanding of the gospel and a belief in it, and also the book itself and understanding how it fit within the Bible, all of a sudden, the first time I realized a book like this was in the Bible, when I first started reading it, I was like, I can't believe this has been in the Bible my whole life. And I never knew there's something like this in here. I was like shocked. But as I went through, I saw, and I just want to share some of these verses that still have great meaning for me today. And, I still find powerful. Here, the teacher of wisdom is speaking in Ecclesiastes 1. And listen to what he says in verse 17, 18. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is but a striving after wind. And even the poetic imagery gets me, striving after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. And all these things I would think about and realize how true they were about the human experience. Then going over to chapter 2, verse 11, he speaks about how one way he tried to satisfy or appease himself or find joy in life was through toil and work and building. And in 2:11, he says, then I considered, so he's thinking, all that my hands had done and the toil I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity and a striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. Now that refrain is important because it shows that if there is nothing above the sun, and all there is the physical universe in essence, that's what this under the sun language is saying, then there's no real long-term gain, and everything literally is vain. It's meaningless. Verse 15 of the same chapter, I'm going to read a few verses here. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And what's crazy is how random death could come to the wise man. You could be the wisest man, and you're waiting at a red light, and a crane falls on you, and that's it. And the fool lives 80 years, and he smokes every day. It's like this is the insanity, the possible insanity of life. And that's why some secular philosophers end up just saying, well, it's absurd. And the only thing we can do is to fight the absurdity of life in some act of human triumph. But to what end? There is no end to that. There's no reason. And I said in my heart that this also is vanity. For of the wise as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance. Think about this. Everyone you know, and everyone who knows you, as far as knows you, will be dead within 125 years. Maybe you could say 150 if you want to be really liberal. Everyone you know or who knows you. So the youngest baby, if you're 80 years old and you touch a newborn and die the next day, that newborn, that's the last person that had contact with you, 150 years? And they're not going to have much of a memory anyway. And then you just realize the fleetingness of it all and the emptiness of it all. And it's like, what are we trying to accomplish here if all we have is under the sun? And then the next verse, for of the wise as the fool, there's no one, seeing that in the days to come, all will have been long forgotten, how the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all was vanity and a striving after the wind. And it's after, you see some of the bitterness, potential bitterness of life. Life loses some of its sweetness. And I think that's what he's saying there. Again, this is the vantage point of under the sun. Then I'm going to read just a few more in chapter 3. What gain has the worker from his toil? I've seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He's made everything beautiful in its time. Now notice, this is showing the truth that things can only be meaningful objectively if there's an objective one who can give them objective meaning. Now, the modern tendency is like we make our own meaning, we set our own rules, but inventing meaning is not really meaning, because you could say my goal in life is to become the number one fantasy football player of all time. And to you, that's very meaningful. But it seems like most people realize that is not really objectively a meaningful goal in life. But yet, if we can just set our own meaning at random, there's no standard, then it shows really it's meaningless ultimately. He has made everything beautiful in its time. And listen, this verse gets me every time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceive that there is nothing better for them to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. Now, notice again, only if there's a God does it change the equation. If there's something outside the physical universe greater than just under the sun. And this really, I think, gets to the creed. I wore this again on purpose. What's one of the things the Reformers said? Soli Deo Gloria, to the glory of God alone. And that's why, the Catholics had a separation between toil and clergy and lay people and all this. The Reformers said, no, everything to the glory of God and to the glory of God alone. And if God is real and true, it makes sense to say that, because he's created these things for a reason. Last verse I'm going to read, and I would encourage people to go through this book, especially the last chapter, but it's if you really contemplate on it and ask the Lord to show you himself, and then especially in conjunction with, say, one of the Gospels, it's just a powerful one too. The last two verses of chapter 3 that I'm going to read. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it so that people fear before him. That which is already has been, that which is to be already has been, and God seeks what has been driven away. Now, the key thing I just want to take out of there It's almost like the way I became successful in apologetics is by hitching my wagon to David Woods. But in all seriousness, just like with God, the only way for your life and what you do to have any meaning is for you to hitch your wagon to one who has endurance of memory and objective meaning that he instills into whatever you do. Do you see, like, without God, it's just null and void and meaningless and empty and striving after when. And the one thing I like about the old atheists is I feel a little bit more like they peered into the void, the blackness that is true atheism, and they admitted it and said it what they said it was. It is what it is. Like when you look at Hume, for example, and even he may be a madman at certainly some points, Nietzsche and people like that saw the void of atheism for what it was, but then they would come up with some absurd way to try to conquer it or to still enjoy yourself or something like that. But the modern atheists want to have their cake and eat it too. You know, they're not dealing with the fact of what it really means, by and large, for life to be, simply under the sun and nothing else to it. There's a few. I mean, I don't know if you guys have ever seen in Expelled. There's a guy. It's kind of actually sad. I believe he's dead now, but he was a philosopher named Will Provine. And he was an evolutionary. He was a historian of evolutionary biology and population genetics. Just read and listen to some of his interviews about the meaninglessness of existence. It's quite chilling, especially considered how he himself died. But I'll leave that there, and that's why the gospel is the only way out of this conundrum, this mess of human existence, if that we find ourselves in. And so that was powerful to me, and that's why I'm here today.
Yeah. So for me too, and I probably should have been more clear about this. Thanks for sharing that, Vocab. For me, I think personally, what's convincing is not necessarily. So I'll put it this way. I'm trying to think of the best way to word this. I agree with Vocab that this explains the human condition, which is really important. But it's not necessarily an emotional thing. Just because the gospel says something that makes you feel better doesn't mean it's true. That's not what Vocab's saying, I know. But I'd say that Christianity explains human experiences properly. It explains the origin of the universe. It explains why there's consciousness. It explains why there's morality. It explains what, all these things that is the world that we live in. And that's why I think it's so important. Does that make sense, Vocab? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Let me share something. Everything's within a larger framework, meaning it's not merely what you might want to call emotional satisfaction or anything like that, but because you can't have reality contradicting all that. But any worldview, I believe, that is meaningful and beautiful, I believe that part of it actually should be that there is an aspect of fulfillment to it. And indeed, that's part of what would make it compelling, for example, as well. I find nothing compelling about atheism, for example. And I understand the way you guys approach things, and I do those too. That's why I'm into apologetics. But when I sit and think about it, I don't shy away as much, and this is for everyone more in the chat, from what C.S. Lewis called the argument from desire, for example. And that is that we have desires with, for example, what we drink and what we eat. We feel thirsty and hungry, and there's a way to meet those desires. Yet there's this other thing that if there's no God, there's no meeting of the desire, and it would seem out of sync. And now he breaks it down more. And it's similar in some ways to what Augustine said years earlier when he speaks of our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. And then, of course, you have Blaise Pascal spoke along the lines of like a void, a God-shaped void, something like that. Not a big Pascal fan. Sorry, David Wood. But I think some truth to those types of things. And I find resonance when it says he has placed eternity in their hearts. And sometimes I see what happens with only the academic aspects to this. And I respect all that. I mean, we got the books, we talk that way, whatever. But I realize sometimes in these conversations, like when I sit down with smart atheists especially, that a lot of it is a cover and a veil, and behind everything they're saying is just this stark, naked emptiness and meaninglessness. And I like to try to cut through and talk about other things that I find equally important that are very fundamental to human existence that don't always get brought up in apologetic conversations. So yeah, John, you're right. That's not all I'm saying. That's one of the reasons I wanted to go last as well. But I do find compelling the fulfilling aspect of the Christian life. And I do find, because I believe it's sort of like a readily lived out apologetic in a sense of a proof for the truthfulness of Jesus's claims. And I believe that's also part of a reason why it's compelling. And the last thing I'll say about this, and this is because I hold to a belief in the supernatural, meaning we can believe these certain things, we can hear these facts and these information, but at the end of the day, I think we understand and believe that what happened, what Jesus said in John 3, and Jesus said in John 3, you must be born again. And the beauty of what God did at some point in our lives through his Holy Spirit is that he gave us a new heart, 2 Corinthians 5:17. And I think we recognize that. And that's kind of the direction I wanted to go. Now, that's not all I do in apologetics, but to me, this was a good time to do it. But anything you guys want to say?
No, I agree with that. I just say that these things are meaningful because Christianity is true.
Yes.
In a way. So they're not just placebos of some sort or something like that. You know what I mean?
Right. But when an atheist comes at me with that stuff, I'm not saying anyone in the chat. If they were only placebos, meaning, things that weren't true but had some kind of positive effect on you, I don't see how the atheist could really fault the Christian for embracing it. Because I hear atheists say, well, we should want to have as many true beliefs in our cognitive structure as possible. Well, yeah, if truth is objective and there's a reason we should pursue truth, but on atheism, I don't think they could justify that statement. Now, I'm not talking necessarily in the chat or you. I'm just saying those are kind of the things I like to say in response to that. But yeah, it's not because it makes me feel good.
Right.
It's true plus compelling plus fulfilling plus all those things is kind of the idea. And that's why, again, you guys went first is my thought.
Good. No, that's cool. And I'm going to have to take off here in a few minutes. So real quick, I think it'd be cool too for us to kind of talk about some of the other arguments and stuff that we find compelling, because I liked how Wood talked about the ones that he personally found compelling. I'd say for me, what I find the most compelling when it comes to belief in God, I already talked about the Kalam, but also a lot of origin things. So like consciousness is big to me too. And so briefly, what I would say with that is that your thoughts, and there's something about consciousness too. And this is cool because Sam Harris is actually on board with this now too, with consciousness though. But your thoughts are not material things ultimately. Like, so if I'm thinking right now about the fabric of the cosmos, what it is there is, you can see the chemicals in my brain, but that's not ontologically the exact same as the content of the thought. Because if it was, then you can open my brain and actually see what I'm thinking of, right? And especially if I'm thinking of abstractions or something like that. But that's really compelling to me because if at the foundation of the universe, if the universe was all material, then you're like, well, when did these immaterial aspects come into the universe? So if they were there at the foundation of the universe on theism, if God exists, then the immaterial aspects and like consciousness and is at the same foundation of theism. So like God and angels and everything like that, you have these immaterial things, so it makes sense. But on atheism, it would have to come in at a later time. If it did come in, you know what I mean? Either that or there is no such thing as true consciousness, and we're just these, meat robots and this and that too. But that's another thing I can argue for later. But essentially, I think that these kind of origin arguments, for me at least, are the most personally convincing, because I think like if it came in later into reality, then it would have to come from above or something like that, right? And then you still have God into the picture or something like that, or you just can't get to it because they're completely different things when you have immaterial things and non-material things. So stuff like that's really compelling to me. And then like how David Wood said, like the origin of life, getting life from non-life, that seems like an ontological barrier too, that I think is going to be really difficult to cross as well. So those are the things that I personally found compelling when it comes to God. Then when it comes to Christianity, like I said, it's that big picture view. It's like where all the things that we know about this world that exists fit in. Because it's funny, there's an atheist meme that I've been meaning to attach, but it says, yes, I'm an atheist, But just because I don't believe in your God does not mean that I don't believe in anything. I believe in compassion, kindness, love, logic, equality, empathy, myself, integrity, honesty, and more. And it's all these things that we can't prove with the scientific method, right? But they would say that we don't have evidence for God. But these are things that are just inescapable. And it's kind of like how C.S. Lewis did talk about in the first chapter of Mere Christianity, where he's like, yeah, you can deny morality, but 5 minutes later, you're going to be treating it as if it does exist, you know? And so we have all of these things that we know exist. This is the world we live in. And this is why I think atheism has a harder problem trying to get into culture, because you're trying to convince people that, you know, love is just a chemical reaction and it's not something that's beyond that. Or you have all these things that we're only just material. I'm talking about naturalistic atheism, you know, because I think the other type of atheism is just inconsistent, I think, because you have these immaterial things. You have these things that are immaterial, but you're accepting them. And that's just ad hoc to me. That means you're just accepting it so that way atheism isn't falsified. But if atheism does have these non-material things, or if you're an atheist and then you incorporate non-material things into your worldview, then to me, that's just, then theism or believing in God has more explanatory power. It explains it more naturally. So you're not trying to force these things into the worldview to save your view from getting falsified. So at that point, believing in God is it's a superior explanation.
There's things that people live out, and that's something that if I would keep on talking, I might get into, which I'm glad you brought it out, that there's things within a secular, materialistic, atheistic, naturalistic, those kinds of worldviews that the way people live is highly at odds with what they say their worldview is. It's not a livable worldview. And so I'm glad you brought that out. And that's an important point. And that's the other thing is that I find Christianity to be a livable worldview, that you don't have to do all these ad hoc things and have these things that you hold that are highly contradictory from what you say or your axioms. You know what I'm saying? And so did you guys notice we have way more Muslim commenters on any other day before now? I don't know if you guys saw. There's a lot. It's not just take a look through there. No, we can't get to them, you know, out of all the days. But I hope in the future they stick around because there's a lot of folks up in there.
Cool.
I'll also shout out to the super chatters. My favorite one of all time, Grandma. Grandma comes through with the goods. As one person said, she says, God bless you all, and may you continue to bear much fruit. Thank you, Grandma. I wish you had a profile avatar just so I could know what kind of grandma you are, and we could give a real shout out to Grandma. But we still got love for you, Grandma. I mean, how many people have that handle? Say what?
There's another super chat before that, so you know. I just saw it. Okay.
Jesus is God, grace to faith, says God bless you all. Is that the person you're talking about as well, bro?
I think so. It was green and it just went away. So
yeah. So I got that one as well. But there's one other thing I want to say, but I don't remember. But just so everyone knows, I was talking about the book of Ecclesiastes, not Ecclesiasticus, because some people seem confused. Ecclesiastes, I'm talking about in the proper canon, not in the Apocrypha. Two different books.
Hey, Vocab. Give everyone a little quick background here. On Ecclesiastes. One for a while after I became a Christian, that was my favorite book in the Bible, just because because I've been so convinced that everything is meaningless, and then he puts it so well in that book, that view, that it was like, this is just brilliant stuff. But it's interesting how over the years you pick up parts of Ecclesiastes without knowing where it comes from. Remember, John, you're way too young for this, but Vocab, you might remember that song by the Byrds. To everything, turn.
Oh yeah.
Remember that? Yeah. And then they're actually quoting Ecclesiastes, quoting verses of Ecclesiastes in the song. And you think, oh, what an awesome song, and not realize, oh yeah, well, that's actually from the Bible there. But before I ever actually read the book of Ecclesiastes. So back when I was still an atheist, I read George Orwell's Politics and the English Language, where he was arguing that modern language is actually designed to stifle actual communication of ideas, right? It's meant to conceal it, and it's contributing to the decline of society by how we use language now. Instead of giving it and using language to powerfully convey meaningful content, political discourse is meant to cover things up with confusing language so you don't know what someone's actually saying. And he actually used a passage from Ecclesiastes to make his point. He said it how it appears in the book of Ecclesiastes to make a point. And then he said, this is what it would look like today if some sort of politician were to say it. And so here's his example. He goes, here's a well-known verse from Ecclesiastes. I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happen to them all. So
Yeah.
very clear, very concise, massive meaning in one sentence, very awesome stuff. And then he says, here's what this would look like if a modern politician were saying it. Objective considerations of contemporary phenomena compel the conclusion that success or failure in competitive activities exhibits no tendency to be commensurate with innate capacity, but that a considerable element of the unpredictable must invariably be taken into account. Now, he's saying the exact same thing. He's saying the exact same thing, thought for thought, as what's in Ecclesiastes, but you would have to sit there and think, wait, what is this? What is this saying? What is this saying here? And so it's just interesting, the use that this book from thousands of years ago still gets. And yeah. Anyway, interesting.
Yeah,
book.
no, that's good, man. And like, I mean, it's a philosophical treatise in the Bible, but yet it's so practical and readable, and yet it has an aesthetic beauty. I mean, again, some people don't find this kind of talk compelling, but I don't like leaving it out. So it's not all that I do, but these are things that still I think are important to talk about. And also in apologetics, I think we realize, because a lot of people get in apologetics and they have certain focuses and all that, and that's good. But there are different apologetics that are some strike more resonance with with people than others. And I think we should recognize that. And one thing is the way scripture can be so terse and have brevity, and yet have this power and impact and aesthetic beauty and all that just in there. And it's like, there's nothing like scripture, and it gets into you in a way. And, I heard that, David, in a sense, when you were talking, when you spoke about the person of Jesus, and, but again, it's not, I don't stay away from that other stuff. Like John, what you were mentioning, it's funny. I went with Jeff Durbin when Lawrence Krauss was doing this thing called the Origins Project at ASU, right? And he brought Richard Dawkins out. Because I don't know if you remember, there's a period where Krauss was kind of making a play to be like in the top tier of the atheists, and he did that documentary called Unbelievers or whatever, like try to show like atheists as rock stars. And so he had Dawkins there, and Krauss is like really nonchalant about problems and atheists. Specifically, they were dealing with what's sometimes called chemical evolution, the problem of like non-life and the prebiotic and all this type of stuff. And Krauss had a very casual attitude about some of the challenges and problems, and Dawkins was stopping him, just saying, no, this is a big issue for us to overcome. Like we shouldn't snuff it out. We shouldn't snuff at it. We shouldn't. He talked about we need to roll up our sleeves, and this is a serious consideration, like getting organic from inorganic, like the very beginning of the process to even have organic life in the first place. And it was just struck me the kind of casual, kind of it works type of attitude Krauss had, and Dawkins, whatever flaws he might have, at least there was willing to like kind of pump your brakes to Krauss to mention what a big problem the challenge of the origin of life itself was on any evolutionary understanding, because you can't have the fittest if you can't have survival of the fittest if you don't even have any competitors or those who are fit in the first place. It's a big deal, this problem. So those things are true too. What else we got? Oh, someone else super chat.
Well, John has to take off in 5 minutes, so you should be wrapping things up here.
Okay, then let's give a shout out to this super chatter who just joined us. Where they go? It's not Grandma, it's a new person. And Barb L. When I finally saw the tenets of the Reformation, I finally saw total depravity of man, answered my heartfelt cry for understanding. Why do I sin, etc.? God explains why and who I am. God bless, guys. Well, thank you, Barb, for the super chat. And she earned that comment. Wow. All right. Sometime we'll probably have to talk about some of those issues, and maybe there's a way we can do it as friends. And because I have a feeling I'm going to lose people off of it. I'm not going to put it down people's throat, but just trying to have fun with it, guys. So that's it, huh? Tomorrow, commentary on the epilogue. And if you haven't seen the epilogue, go watch it. You guys have any announcements before we do our silent stare?
No, I'm planning on going live on my channel sometime this week, and then just to kind of talk with everybody too. And what I would like is to invite a lot of skeptics or people who disagree with me and stuff like that to come and bring in their objections or their things, so we can kind of deal with some of those objections as long as they're, you know, respectful. So maybe we get you guys on too if you guys are free to do it too. It'd be pretty fun. So
nice.
Anthony Rogers and I will be starting a daily live stream of 1 hour called Answering Islam Live. We'll be starting that Wednesday at 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock p.m. where we'll be responding to questions and comments of both Christians and Muslims dealing with Christianity and Islam. So we're gonna try that. It's gonna be experimental. We'll try it for a little while, see if people are interested in that kind of format. But if people like it, we'll keep it going.
1 hour?
Yeah, 1 hour.
Every day, Monday through Friday?
Monday through Friday. Yeah, that's the plan. And we're gonna keep that up for 2 weeks and then decide how to adapt it, whether to make it once or twice a week or to make it every day or we're gonna trial and error. Lots of stuff on YouTube is trial and error if it's something new for you.
All right, no doubt. Well, that sounds awesome. And I'm going to be doing some stuff too. Just everyone pay attention. I'll talk about it more tomorrow and catch us on social media with that. We better get out of here so John can get out of here. Everybody ready? Awkward, silent, stare.